Welcome to Pressure Point. I'm Brad Newcombe.
And I'm Marilou Carrillo. It's always a curious thing that when we want to discuss religious subjects in our daily life, there's discomfort and unease and embarrassment. In this program, we hope to discuss religious themes in open ways and with a challenging attitude. And to help us do this is Douglas Todd, columnist of religious subjects on the Vancouver Sun. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I'm not quite sure whether to call you a religious columnist or a columnist of religious themes.
I like the second part better. When people call me the religious writer, it makes it seem like I have to start talking about how faithful I am and how devoted, and I'd rather be seen as a little more neutral or impartial, or writing about other people's religions.
Yes.
You know.
But then, when you raise that question, you don't want to talk about your own faithfulness, perhaps, but what got you interested in religion? I mean, you write very extensively and very broadly about a huge variety of religious and ethical issues. So how'd you get started?
Well, I think, unlike most people, I was not turned off by religion at a young age because I was an atheist. My family were all atheists, and they brought me up to be atheists. We would read Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus when I was a teenager, and when, say, the evangelical or evangelists would come around to high school, my friends would all send me out to argue with them because they thought I'd be the best defender of whatever. So I didn't go to church when I was a kid. So, like a lot of people when they're 12 or 13, they go to church and they say, oh, what is going on here? I do not like this, what I'm learning, and they get turned off. So I never got turned off. It was sort of the religion ended up being sort of a forbidden fruit for me, just the way atheism maybe was for people who went to church. And so I'm been fascinated ever since I was 18, 20 years old. I met some people who were religious, and I realized they're not kooks. As a matter of fact, they probably had some things going for them that I didn't. So.
And now you not only write a column on religion about 2 or 3 times a week for one of the major papers in Canada, but you've also received the Templeton Reporter of the Year award. How did you get there?
Well, it's given out by the Religion Newswriters Association of North America, and some of the judges are from Columbia University, etc. And you submit a body of work, 5 different articles from a certain year. It was 90 last year, and they thought my stuff showed the most versatility and enterprise. And it was for some hard news stories and some features about the 7 deadly sins and stuff like that.
And that's a very impressive award, just to say congratulations. I mean, it's given by the Religious Newswriters Association of North America. You were up in competition with New York Times, the Washington Post, the San Francisco Chronicle, and so that's wonderful.
It was a pretty big pleasure.
I'm sure.
Because I love the work of the guys you just mentioned.
Right.
And sort of being their league was great.
So what do you think was the angle that the judges saw in your writing that gave you the award? I mean, obviously, you must bring a particular spin on an issue, on a story. What was it in your estimation?
Well, the judges said I wrote with sparkle. I think they kind of liked my writing that had a certain clarity and maybe earthiness, I hope. But I think I wrote about spirituality in the Arctic, and I think that caught the imagination of American judges a fair amount. And I wrote about, because Americans love, they have romantic views of the North, so that was in my favor. And I think they thought that was pretty enterprising to go up there where it's so cold and forbidding. And I broke that story about the Catholic Bishop O'Connor fathering a baby. So that was an exclusive story, so they were impressed by that. And I wrote a feature about sort of updating the 7 deadly sins for our times, trying to see if they had any relevance, and finding, I think, that they have quite a bit of relevance. So they liked the range, I gather, of those kind of stories.
Maybe, how did you take the story on Father O'Connor and the baby? How did you come across? How did you break that story?
Yeah, it was a hunch. I mean, it's a really sad story, and it's funny to win awards for something like that in a way because it's so sad and in a way you're not proud of it. But I think it's important. But I just had a hunch that there was something in some court transcripts from a northern court room that nobody had ever looked at and was even allowed to look at until a crucial point. And actually the son helped pay, $350 actually to get these transcripts, and I scoured them, and the son had the courage to run the stories at a certain time, even though there were some legal complications that they could have been worried about, and they decided not to be.
And perhaps we're talking about this as assuming that people know what we're talking about, so maybe you could just recap it shortly, what this exclusive story was.
Prince George Bishop O'Connor was a fairly respected Catholic bishop who ran the St. Joseph's Residential School for Native kids in near Williams Lake in the 60s. And a lot of charges are against the people the priests who ran that school are coming out now. And he, after very complicated police procedures, was charged. I actually have to avoid going into all the details of it in some ways because it's an incredibly long story, but he was charged with some sexual abuse, which has never come to a full trial. But these transcripts were available showing that he actually did admit in a courtroom to fathering a child, which of course is not necessarily against the law. It hasn't been proved to be against the law, but of course it's a disgrace for him as a priest who took a vow of celibacy to be in that situation.
And so this relationship of religion and the media, now as we talk about your award, it seems like a natural thing because of your writing, but it hasn't always been this smooth. People who want to write about religion and newspapers. Right.
In some ways religion has always been, until fairly recently, I think, a low status beat at newspapers. Is something you always gave to the office drunk who sort of couldn't handle anything else, or to the new kid who couldn't say no, or half the time it was just ignored. And so it was something I decided to do 3 or 4 years ago after I've done about 10 years of regular journalism before that, the whole range of things from murder trials to politics to whatever. It's turned out great. Like, I thought I was sort of taking a bit of a risk by choosing to write about religion and ethics, like that I would be getting to a low status thing, but it's turned out to be the opposite.
Yeah, and how did it turn? What turned it around?
Well, just readers, basically. They love it.
Because you get so much response, right?
Yeah, tons of letters.
Did that surprise the editors of the Vancouver Sun? Did you suddenly, then this, because there was not a religion ethics page before. Now there is, and there's always letters. I read them all the time.
Yeah. There was a page where they ran some wire stuff for a couple of years. And we've had some pretty good religion writers who just fell into it, who tried to make the best of it. But I think it also surprised people just how much of our lives religion can touch upon if you write about it in a kind of non-churchy way. If you don't get wrapped up in church politics, which I actually find fairly boring. So I try and write about issues that I think will resonate with a lot of people. Like I basically write for a secular audience, I think. I don't write for church people, but I hope that they're reading at the same time.
You just made a statement there which I find really interesting. You said you find church politics quite boring, and you have to write in a non-churchy way, which I think is so refreshing, which is what most of us would want. So is that why the church is in decline? I'm making an assumption here, maybe, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, but I think, from my experience, that the church is in decline. Is that why? Because it uses the wrong language, and it is and its politics are boring?
Oh, geez. Church in decline.
Or let me add something there. Or is it that you are touching on spirituality and our churches aren't?
Well, I think
I like that spin. I like that spin.
Let's just add on to that.
Occasionally I think to changing the title of the page to spirituality and ethics rather than religion and ethics, because religion implies institutionalized religion, which does turn off a lot of people. Partly unfairly. I think a lot of people don't really realize what's going on in the churches, and that it's can be quite exciting. Like some churches are kind of depressing and scary and autocratic, but others are quite exciting, and I think a lot of people just don't know that. They still have an image of the churches as stuck in the 50s, right? So that a lot of people just don't know what it offers.
So you're
or
feeling
other religions too, beyond
you're
Christianity.
feeling that your mandate is to talk to the spiritual desires of people
Yeah.
that are not necessarily connected to institutionalized religions.
I don't worry about if they're connected or not. I mean, I think they actually are often, but I'm not there to sell churches, which I think upsets readers occasionally.
You're there to raise issues, as you mentioned earlier, raise issues.
Talk about.
Let's just move into ethics then, a little bit about some of the ethical issues from your research and your writing, some of the really cutting edge areas in terms of ethics.
I started writing about ethics to expand the readership in a way. And occasionally I get tired with religion. You just want to write about something without having to bring a religious perspective to it. And write about important sort of moral issues without turning off people who get turned off by the word religion. So that's why maybe a third of the time I write about just ethical issues. It could be anything from the ethics of free trade. A lot of people don't even realize that there are ethical issues involved, to the obvious things like the ethics of abortion, the ethics of euthanasia. And I tried to make it real, down to earth, like you get into ethics of how do you divide up housework, the ethics of competition in kids' sports. How do you handle that? Try to make it real, really just relate to people's everyday lives.
There's also a flow of private and public religion in your writing, because religion seems to carry, or ethics as well, seem to carry with it a private dimension. But having a column brings it right out to the public domain. And is that uncomfortable for the editors, for the readers, the advertisers, for other religious writers?
For Canadians, I mean, we don't like talking about it sometimes, we really don't.
Yeah, that's right. Well,
let's just keep it under wraps.
What's that old saying? I mean, the three things you never talk about in polite company are sex, politics, and religion.
Right.
And I think that.
And maybe now we talk more about politics and sex, but we don't talk about religion.
Yeah, right. Although it's coming back in. All the polls show people are really interested in religion, as I think you guys are aware of those. Yeah, they might not be going to churches in huge numbers. Although, I mean, even then, even in BC, which is the most secular province in Canada, what is it, about 20% of people go to churches almost every week. Like, that's 500,000 people. That's an incredible amount of people. It's far more than go to sporting events and stuff like that.
I guess one of the reasons why people are conscious of that is that it used to be higher.
Yeah.
I mean, historically in the country it was higher.
Yep.
I mean, it would have been maybe 80-90%, I'm sure, at one point.
I don't know if it was ever that high, but maybe 50, 60.
Yeah, okay.
Whatever.
But it's a drop.
It's a very big drop.
And the church itself, or any religious institution, but because we have the Judeo-Christian heritage in this society, we've lost some of that. It doesn't hold the same place. And the place it does hold in people's hearts and minds is different. And maybe it's a better place because it's coming from inside. I mean, people are interested for the spiritual component as opposed to the power.
It's a tougher choice to make now, to go to follow a religion. So people are being kind of more.
So are you writing from a Western or European Christian perspective?
Probably without trying to, yeah. But I don't mind that. I mean, because surveys show 75% of Canadians still consider themselves Christian. So in terms of trying to reach the audience, that's okay to do that, I think. And I do try to write about Buddhism from time to time and Confucianism, what it means for all of the Asian immigrants. It means a lot. And I really am fascinated by Eastern religions anyways. I write about native spirituality a fair amount. But I tried Judaism.
Did that surprise you, the result of that poll, that 75% of Canadians think of themselves as Christian? Do you find, would identify themselves as Christian?
Yeah, I'm still trying to work it out in my mind. It shows that people are not very honest about religion. Or they're, as you were said in the intro, even they're shy about it. They're embarrassed by it. But and even in the office, newsrooms are pretty cynical places with hard-nosed types. And
so what are you hearing in the newsroom?
They're realizing how many people are quite spiritual. they almost come out of the closet to me over the years. You know, they realize I take religion seriously, and they realize they can talk to me about issues, and they tell me a lot of their things that are important to them. About
Other than the, when you talked about ethics, other than the subjects you are writing about, what is your sense about the ethical issues that people are interested in as our society gets more and more complex? What are you hearing from the newsroom or from your readers?
I don't know if it's a real, I find it quite an amorphous kind of mess that I'm getting in terms of what people are interested in morally. Let's say maybe I could focus on, they're really worried about how to raise their kids and to have values. You know, they partly just want to send their kids to church just so they'll get values, but even though they don't want to go to church because they have their hang-ups about church or whatever. So a lot of baby boom types, of which there are many.
Well, you and I spoke about a lack of moral leadership in our times. We couldn't identify a leader or two.
We wonder where is the moral leadership in today's society, in the world even, not just in terms of Canada or North America, but in the world. I mean, because we do have this global village.
I don't know.
Or is it in our communities, or is it too much to expect, or maybe unhealthy to expect, a moral leader of that kind of caliber on a global level?
Yeah.
And is it in the community? Is it someone, you know, the aunt, the uncle, the parent, the minister, the teacher, whoever?
Yeah, I think that's the most healthy models to have. But I think on the public, I mean, in the huge global perspective, there's probably the Dalai Lama and Mother Teresa, Jean Vanier types. We had Martin Luther King, had Gandhi, 20, 30 years ago. Politicians don't do it, partly because the media is so vicious towards politicians now. You could be a saint and you would not sort of be held up as any sort of moral authority as a politician. Partly because politicians are so pragmatic now these days too.
Yes. And why would you consider the Dalai Lama as a spiritual leader?
Well, only because so many people do. And I think he's a pretty cool guy too. But
Just in what way?
He's revered.
Yes.
I mean, he
But
excites
why?
the imagination of an incredible, diverse group of people because of his, nonviolent reaction to Tibetan occupation, and because he's got things to say that aren't about spirituality, that aren't dogmatic, and that seem open-minded, and that really resonates with people. And he's a simple guy. He's got a good sense of humor.
In terms of moral leadership, spiritual authenticity, religious leaders, who's impressed you? I mean, you've met many people in the course of writing your column. Who's impressed you?
Where do I start, or should I start?
A couple of
Well,
examples.
some of the people, Jean Vanier and Dalai Lama, I thought, just because, I'll say a bit more about him because so many people are interested in him. I thought he maybe was just sort of a good guy who wasn't that bright from my impression of him through the media over the years, but realized spending many hours listening to him or interviewing him that he was extremely bright, but he has a way of popularizing complex Buddhist thought for people. And that's part of his genius. So I was impressed by him. Oh, Sally McFaig, she's a feminist theologian.
Yes. Who's written The Body of God.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I could mumble my way through quite a few people, I suppose. But
when Marilou and I talked a little bit about talking with you, we talked about the rise of the Reform Party, and wondering if you would see in that a trend in Canada that would be sort of copying or following the trend that we've seen in the United States, and that is the rise of the religious right in terms of political involvement and as a movement.
I'm not the only one who thinks Canada's becoming more American in the terms of the religious right, becoming more strong and feeling its muscle. I don't think we'll ever become like the religious right in the South of Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell, where really kind of militant, hard-edged, uncompromising. I don't think it's going to happen because reform even though Preston Manning, the leader, is much more is a evangelical and quite strong evangelical church, the Alliance Church. He's a very pragmatic guy, and he's been kind of burying his Christianity. Even though they say that 1/3 of his candidates are evangelical Christians.
Mm-hmm.
But if parents are saying they're concerned about the lack of moral values, and we can't seem to come up with a list of names of moral leaders, is this not ripe for, when they talk about a time when there's a vacuum in this area?
Yeah.
Then the people who are more extreme fill in that vacuum. Is that not a concern?
Yeah, I think I think so. There's a lot of ambiguity in the world, and people don't like ambiguity, so they're drawn to forceful leaders who act like they've got all the answers.
And yet, on the other hand, when you were talking about ethics, when we look at ethical issues, then we're it's chock full of ambiguity, isn't it?
Yeah. Although, I've been, pleased by in my work. It's like I learn a lot through my work. It's like going to university. It's great. Is I realize that you take these tough ethical issues, and you talk to people who specialized in thinking about them for their lives, and they've got answers. They're good. There are answers to a lot of these questions that we struggle over. There's more clarity out there than I think people think, and that even I thought about ethical issues. It's not all just relative, and anything goes. You can bring guidelines to this stuff.
And maybe that's why people hunger for, maybe that's the popularity and so on, because we we all have the same questions, and we face the same concerns, but we don't often. There's no place for us to talk about it often, is there?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's one of the frustrating things I find, is that there, where's the forum for us to talk about it? I mean, it's not sometimes appropriate at work, or we don't get the chance.
Oh, yeah.
For example, one of the issues that concerns me are the ethical issues around technology and genetics.
Yeah.
And I just heard recently about a woman an indigenous woman who talked about a human genome diversity project.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I'm just going to start writing about it this week, actually.
Are
tomorrow.
you? Yes. So that's a real concern, and there is no forum to discuss those things.
Not
and
really.
it's the technology is getting ahead of our moral, spiritual development, and yet here we are.
Yeah.
How do we talk about these things or exchange views on it?
Yeah, I mean, by reading the Vancouver Sun.
Maybe reading Douglas Todd, Religion and Ethics.
But I take it as a real compliment. Some people tell me they clip my stuff and put it on the fridge or send it to their friends, or they say it's the first thing they read. I mean, other people don't read it, but
no.
But it's great. I think it's responding to a hunger for a certain type of people.
I think so. I mean, people have told me that that's why they buy the Sun on Saturday, for instance, is to read your column.
Yeah,
what about a book then? Are you thinking of doing a book? I mean,
yeah, I'm trying to put together. I've got 3 books in mind, but one's actually going to come out in February through Self-Counsel Press, and it's about ethics of everyday life. The title is The Soul Searcher's Guide to the Galaxy, and a subtitle about dealing with life's everyday challenges, from sex to housework to global warming. And it'll be sort of a user-friendly book with some questions and a little bit of fun, I hope, as you lead people through a lot of ethical issues.
Give us an example of the fun part.
Oh, geez. I've had the book out of my mind for a while. So.
Oh, I thought the reason you were hesitating was because there was so much fun there.
No, there's just it's not that much. No, it's just got questions about what you do in tough situations and ethical situations. Let's hope that'll make people sweat a bit.
Right.
Right.
And I try to not make people feel too guilty,
That's important too.
It is, because we all fall short.
And also a lot of, I think, associations that people have with the whole area of religion and ethics has been one that has provoked a lot of guilt. So that perhaps another reason for the taboo nature of it is that people hold back on even sharing. And I think people hold back on sharing ideas because it's been presented in such a right way and a wrong way, and not really a kind of dialogue where you can sort of enter into this together and sort of,
That's right.
Well, let me just throw something else here in terms of lack of dialogue is from a multicultural society's perspective, religion is a really sensitive area for many cultures. It's a a memory of imperialism, and for some people it's difficult to separate the rise of Christianity in some of these countries and political domination as well. So, you know, I mean, this notion that is a Buddhist truly equal, an authentic Buddhist, is an authentic Buddhist really truly equal to an authentic Christian?
Right.
And if that's the case, well then, how can we justify, quote, evangelism and trying to change people, knowing that more membership into the Christian church means fewer Buddhists? And so I think, you know, it's among people of different cultures, this is a very sensitive area that we're not really talking about either.
And of course, I mean, we could move in, we won't have that much time. Maybe we'll have to have you back sometime and talk further, because that we haven't even begun to look into that, the cross-cultural and interfaith component that is now a challenge on the Canadian scene.
It's a pretty exciting area, but as you say, it's really touchy. Partly that makes it interesting. And I try not to be afraid of touchy subjects, but I try to deal with them kind of fairness, be fair and balanced in them. So I think that's why I survive.
Well, you've certainly, I know, provoked a lot of discussion in areas that I've been involved in, both socially and also professionally, where people take the issues because you have such a wide public forum and talk about them. So Doug Todd, I want to thank you so much for being with us here in Pressure Point.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks very much.
It's been a real pleasure. I've been talking with Douglas Todd, who has a weekly column with the Vancouver Sun on religion and ethics. He's also going to be an author of a book coming up in February on ethics, and you've been watching Pressure Point with Marilou, Carrillo and Brad Newcombe. Thanks for watching.
The preceding program was produced through the facilities of Rogers Community 4, Vancouver. We want to hear from you and invite you to leave your comments and suggestions on our 24-hour response line message machine. Please call 731-5812.